Welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast, where we celebrate recruiting by exploring the stories of leaders and top performers by digging into their stories and understanding how recruiting has impacted their journey and their success. Guys, I'm so excited to bring you this episode. We've got Zach Arend of Create Purpose Coaching. Zach is a former transportation executive. Zach is a deep thinker. He's a friend of mine. He's been personally helpful for me as a leader, as an entrepreneur. He's a guy who really thinks deep, talks obviously a lot about purpose and coming from things at a different perspective to help you overcome your problems by focusing on the things that matter most. We'll talk about Zach's recruiting story, right? Who has impacted him, who has recruited him, that led him down the path that he's been on. And we talk a little bit about his understanding of just the transportation world, the guy who sold millions of dollars in transportation solutions. And ultimately, we talk about, hey, what really matters, right? What really matters at the end of the day, and how to focus on that more rather than things that don't, which I think we're all after a little bit. So if you want to work with Zach, connect with him on LinkedIn. His name again, Zach Arend, Zachareend. Find him there. Or reach out to me as well. Happy to answer any questions you might have after the podcast. Thanks. All right, Zach, welcome to the Recruiting Stories podcast. I appreciate you being on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Adrian.
Cool. So those of you who don't know Zach is the owner of Create Purpose Coaching. He works with executives and leaders, to overcome big obstacles. Hopefully he can kind of give a little bit better pitch than that, but also has been a transportation executive for a number of years. And he's also a good, close personal friend of mine, and a really insightful guy here as well. So, Zach, you mind kind of just telling everybody a little bit about kind of yourself and your background, how you got into the coaching world and why that is something that you were interested in?
Yeah, no, for sure. And no, it was a great introduction. I think, my background has been in transportation and sales and operations. And, you might wonder, like, how did I go from there to coaching? And it's a long story. So I don't want to go too deep into it, but, I think somewhere along the line, I found what I was really passionate about, and that was developing others. And some of that came through my own failures as a leader, some of my lessons learned, and then also some of the insights that I learned and how coaching can be an accelerant. It was an accelerant for me as I developed in my journey, and now kind of to be able to give back that to other leaders it's just very fulfilling. So I've since left the transportation industry, not because it's a great industry, it's growing, but I chose to follow my passion, and it's been a privilege to get to work with a lot of great leaders as they're trying to build their business. And naturally, when you're trying to build something, you run into obstacles and there's challenges, and just having that, having somebody that's an objective third party to help you think and get more clear on what you really want to create in the business is an important aspect of that journey. So that's what I get to do today. And I have a privilege to work with some private clients through Create Purpose. And then I'm also employed through North Point Development, doing some leadership coaching internally within the business. So fortunate to have that during, this time of COVID and all the uncertainty. So I'm very thankful.
Coaching is something that's really, really near and dear to my heart. Obviously, because I had, coached a little bit in the athletic world. But I think, so for those of you who don't know, Zach and I worked together for, a little bit of time. And one of the things I think that always connected us was that idea of purpose and like working for something higher and for kind of a bigger meaning. Talk to me maybe a little bit about that, because I feel like that's something we've talked about, and that's kind of drew you to coaching. Like, was there any like one moment where you're like, coaching is something that I want to do, that's something that I see myself doing in the future. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think the journey started with me being a young leader. And some would say maybe I got promoted fast and got moved into higher levels of leadership at a very young age, in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, and all exciting. But I think that whole entire time, I felt like I wasn't worthy of the position. I wasn't good enough. There's that label of imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it. That was real. There's just this feeling of constantly needing to prove myself because I was one failure away from being outed, and so there's just what that led to is constant anxiety, turned like 24/7, always plugged into my phone. And part of that, though, is I really wanted to grow. I wanted to play full out. I wanted to go for it. And that part was really fun. But because I didn't feel good enough, I was voraciously reading books, trying to develop myself. Part of that's healthy, but when it becomes I'm developing myself because I don't feel like I'm already good enough, there's a part of that maybe is not as healthy. And I devoured books. I devoured podcasts, and like a lot of people do. But yet I never really felt any closer to that, I don't know, that contentment or just that self-confidence. And it wasn't until I personally started working with a coach that everything started to change. Like the coaching was like an accelerant. It raised my own level of awareness to see that, it sounds like a hokey cliche, but all the answers lie within. And it was actually what I learned most from coaching is learning to trust myself.
Yep.
And this, back to your question around purpose, all the books I was reading and podcasts, I was like searching for purpose. I was searching for my purpose or, how to develop my purpose. And I think the biggest thing I learned through the coaching journey, my own personal journey, was purpose isn't something necessarily that you find. It's not something that kind of you wake up one morning and it smacks you on the side of the head. Maybe it does some people. It didn't for me. It wasn't until I embraced this idea of actually creating my purpose. And I think we all create our purpose every single moment of every single day, and the choices we make, how we choose to respond to challenge, and what we are moving into. And that's why I create purpose. And that's this idea of purpose being, it's not out there. It's within. It's something that's cultivated and created through action. Like you have to, it's values in action. That's what purpose is. It's what do I value? What's important and meaningful to me? And I've and this isn't always accepted, but I'm a proponent to being selfish. In leadership, we talk a lot about being selfless, and there for sure. But there's a part about leadership and in purpose is first making sure whatever you're doing is serving you. And I'm not saying like in materialistic ways, but I'm talking about serving you at your core, your values, that you have to find meaning in it or your heart's not in it. And so that's probably the biggest adjustment I started making is making sure I'm doing things that first serve me so that I can serve others.
Right. So kind of putting on your life jacket, that whole analogy, so you can
right.
life jacket done for other people, right?
Right. And because I wasn't prioritizing that, I was putting myself last in every area, including my family and everything else. And I was, throw the word burnout out there, but I was just, it started to lose its meaning, and I started losing the passion I once had for the job. And it was all because I wasn't serving myself. I wasn't, in a way, putting myself first in a way that was healthy so that I could show up as a leader. And so when I work with coaching clients, that's oftentimes where we spend some time, because oftentimes leaders don't prioritize their own self-care and their own meaning and their own values. And it's like the secret sauce, because when you can bring that to the game every day, you're on fire, and it's a game changer. So
let's talk more about that. I love that idea, because we'll have a bunch of leaders, and we place a bunch of young leaders, be it sales leaders or operations leaders with Cover 3. And so people listening who are in that type of position, that you were in, where it's like, okay, I've always wanted to be the guy or the gal, and suddenly I've got that opportunity. Here I am. And then now that I'm here, wow, it's a lot. So, when you talk about then serving your values, because that's what I heard you say is, okay, instead of saying, okay, I'm just going to, spin on this spin cycle, how do I start serving those values so I can serve other people around me? I guess what, insight would you give to them, having been through kind of what you've been through? And yeah.
Yeah. And I want to ask a question to follow up with your question. What would you say the biggest challenge is for those individuals that are, those operation managers, and what do you kind of sense? Because you have a relationship with a lot of people in the industry, and so you heard firsthand what some of the challenges are. I'm just curious what you hear.
I think a lot of it's just expectations, right? Like and a lot of them, at least from my opinion, is maybe unspoken expectations. So like, yeah, I know I have to reach X goal, but I'm afraid of letting someone down, whether it be a boss or someone at home or even my own ideals. That's what I see a lot of.
Yeah. Yeah. And likewise, that's just that fear of failure, that fear of letting others down. And I've heard it, some would argue like, well, that's healthy. You need that fear to drive you, and I would make the argument though, that that's short lived. And at what cost if you're trying to manage and lead from that place of fear of failure? You're a sports guy, and it's the difference of playing not to lose and playing to win. And there's a difference.
Right.
One is you got the CYA going. It's actually very selfish because you're worried about your own self-preservation. And we all naturally, we're human beings, we're going to do that. But the more you bring your values to it and just start to decide, I'm going to play full out, I'm going to trust myself, I'm going to give my best while also being who I am. And in many ways, those are they're the same thing, like being who you are and your best. That's what authenticity is. And so, I want to answer your question and just pausing for a moment to think, because the pressure is real. We've all sat in that seat, and the pressure is real, and it's healthy. It's good to have some pressure, and there's this, I can't remember what it's called, this human performance curve. And it actually shows that stress actually leads to high performance. You have to have stress, because if you're not stressed, you're bored and you're not going to be high performing. But too much stress is going to diminish your performance. And so first off, that stress and pressure is good, but your relationship with fear is very important, because you can either live from a place of fear and kind of reacting from what you're afraid is going to happen in more of a problem-solving orientation. So it's very reactive, right? You're spending your day putting out fires. It's very reactive. But if you can get into more of a values-based, create purpose type mindset, it's all about, and this is a question I teach leaders to ask instead of, so often we focus on what is the problem? What's the issue here? Mm-hmm. And instead of asking that question, just being able to observe what's happening and then ask the question, what's the result I desire to create next?
Yeah.
And how would I create it? And staying in that constructive mindset, that is creating purpose, that is living into your values. There's just a difference. Again, that difference is between playing not to lose and playing to win. And playing to win is what brings high performance as a leader. And naturally, so goes the leader, as goes the rest of the organization. And so I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I think fear is at the heart of some of the challenges.
It did. Yeah. So I'll relate it back and kind of like use a sports analogy. Like because what you said to me, it just made me think of this example that I used when I was playing football, for instance. And, we always would use the phrase like, don't get paralysis by analysis. So basically, like, I'd have this fear of failure. And so, and I might know what to do, but I was so afraid of making the wrong decisions that I wouldn't make it. So I would just be inactive, right? Or, I would kind of start to make an action, but I would be slow because I was like, well, is this 100% right? And so what I found was that I played the most free, and I think this is the case for a lot of people, both in business and in sports, is like when I personally take care of myself, and that means off the field, like I'm healthy, I'm mentally healthy, I'm spiritually healthy, and I'm confident in my direction. And then when I'm on the field, that translates over, and then I'm really kind of one mindset to say, like, because I know my job first and I take care of my job, because everything else off the field is taken care of, I can be kind of one mind and I can take care of my job here on the field. And once I feel confident in knowing exactly what my job is, if I'm supposed to blitz on this play and I know I'm supposed to do that, it's easier for me then to lead because I can look around me and the game starts to slow down because I put my ducks in a row, so to speak. That's kind of what I heard.
Yeah. And if I just could add on to that, like the effects of fear and too much stress, like you said, it kind of has this debilitating feeling. And there's research that shows like when you start focusing on what you want and you think about your vision and what you're creating, it actually activates more of the parasympathetic nervous system. It's actually kind of that's where creativity comes from, and being more of an open relational communicator, all the traits that make for great leaders, right? But when you're shrouded by fear and you start relying on your discipline and willpower and grit, now you're talking about the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response. And all your brain power shuts down. The creativity goes out the window, and you literally cannot see the opportunities. All you see is the problems and the challenge, and you feel stuck. Mm-hmm. And so that's the opportunity, is to get yourself in a state where you can bring your A game.
Absolutely.
And and the last thing, if it's okay to add one more thing, is we're talking about leaders here. We're talking about managers. Implicit in that is they have a team.
Right. And
I've been doing a lot of work with servant leadership right now and doing some trainings, and it's we've all heard it said, what got you here won't get you there. And a lot of us go from individual contributor to manager to leader. And as you elevate yourself in an organization, you have to change up your approach, because what once served you may not be serving you any longer. And that's this idea of servant leadership. When you have an organization, you have a team that you're leading, your job is different now. It's now to tap the potential of those individuals. And, there's a great quote by Patty McCord. She was the chief talent officer at Netflix. And she talks about this idea of empowerment. Leaders talk about like, well, empower my people. How do I get them to take ownership? And it's this big elusive, you just can't quite get your people to take ownership. And we were trying to empower. And she's like, companies need to stop trying to empower people. They need to, people don't need empowered. They already are powerful. And it's the job of the leader to see them as powerful, remind them of that often, and create the conditions for them to exercise the power. And I love that, because I think that's the work of a servant leader. Is it's not to jump in and solve somebody else's problem for them, fix something, because we all want to, there's some of us just love fixing things. Feels good, right? It feeds the ego. But if we can show up for people in a different way, more like a coach, and I think I've gotten a unique perspective learning coaching, is helping people find their own answers, is servant leadership. And you do that through talking way less and asking a whole lot more questions, and helping people keep the responsibility, keep the ownership with them as a leader. And so that's something that's just coming to mind. I know we're kind of freestyling here, but that just kind of came to my mind. I wanted to share it.
No, I think that's good. And I think that's it's an interesting point, just because, when you think of leaders, how often are they just kind of considered like, okay, I've got to be the hero all the time because I've been a performer, right? And you talk about, you sold millions of dollars, worth of services and things like that. Well, now I've got to lead people instead. That looks completely different than just being a performer. And that changes things as well.
Yeah. It's interesting you use the word hero, because to be a hero, you have to have a victim, and you have to have a villain, a protagonist.
Right.
And so oftentimes when you rescue somebody, when you play you are creating a victim.
Right.
And I've said it, and sometimes it doesn't sit well with people, but like whenever you do something for somebody that they otherwise could do for themselves, you are creating a victim. And is that really what you want? Yeah.
That's a really interesting point, and well heard. So that's good.
Yeah.
Well, so let me ask you this. Kind of, obviously, a lot of what we do at Cover 3 has to, goes back to recruiting and goes back to talent and dealing with that. So we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges leaders have. Like when you think back to your story, was there like ever a leader at some point who created a fork in the road, like in a positive way?
Yeah.
That was like, okay, man, if I wouldn't have done this, I would have been on a different path, and kind of walk me through a little bit of that.
Yeah. Two people come to mind, and I don't know. I do believe life happens for a reason, and so there is that only one path. It's already, there's that the plan. There's purpose to everything. But if I did reflect to like, gosh, there's two people that come to mind, and the first one, I'll name some names. I think it's okay. The first individual was when I first started my career right out of college. It was when I started in the transportation industry in sales. And I started working for a man, Jim Fizzell, and he's here in Kansas City. He now has a real estate company here in Kansas City, but I've not met anybody like Jim. And he probably at a very young age got me asking bigger questions about my purpose, my why. Like what is it that gets me excited to get out of bed every morning, and what's the meaning behind what I'm doing and how am I serving others? And he just got me contemplating life in a different way. Because before that, it was I was a college kid, life is somewhat simple. You kind of go day by day. He certainly broadened that aperture. So that was right out of college, that got me pursuing life in a different way. But then the other gentleman was named Jeff Cernicki. It's funny because I actually worked with him prior to leaving college for UPS. I worked evenings, and he was at the time just bigger than life leader at UPS for somebody who's just kind of an hourly employee loading boxes on a truck. But reconnected with him years later. I was 30 some years old, and he had just started doing leadership coaching. And I was just kind of like, what are you up to? And I had a goal of just networking, and we started a coaching relationship. And the reason I name him is because that was a big turning point in my life. Because up until that point, I was searching, just looking for purpose and my role in all of that and meaning, and never kind of feeling like enough. And it was the conversations that we had over a year, and actually we still have a relationship today and work together, but just helping me crystallize what my values were and what my purpose was, and finding ways to just live into that, whether it's at work or not. So many people tie their identities to their title or their profession. And what Jeff helped me do is kind of tear down the walls, and just, it's all more about who I am and who I'm being regardless. And it was a game changer for me.
That's really cool. What I love about both of those people is there was something within each of those people that was so different, and kind of forced you to look at life from a different angle, that made you say almost like, I want some of that. Like, tell me more. I want to learn from that. Is that right?
Yeah. Right. I think it started with curiosity, and the first person I mentioned, Jim, he prompted the curiosity for me to start asking questions. And that's when I started reading a lot, and just like a lot of our journeys, right? You're like, oh, wow, there's all this opportunity out there. What do I want? What do I want to pursue? And what do I want it to mean for me? But, everything happens for a reason. Like it was a journey, and it kind of looking back, it's almost like looking back, it almost always makes sense. It's like, wow, look at how things have progressed.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm just very grateful for having the opportunity to meet people like that. And there's many others, but I don't know, just those two just jumped out when you asked the question.
Well, so as someone then who has both been recruited, and you've recruited a bunch of people yourself, and now at this point in your career, a lot of people listening to this might be considering and looking for people, so doing recruiting themselves, or really trying to find game changers, trying to find the next Zach Arend for their organization. Like, what, I guess, advice would you give, or what would you look for when you're looking for talent today?
Yeah. Well, it's actually some of the leaders I work with. They're entrepreneurial leaders. They have small businesses, and they're growing, and they need to bring in people, and I think number one is a leader, an organization has to know what their values are. And first of all, values can't be values just on the wall, because if it's funny, if Enron had values, and it was like integrity. I don't remember what they were, but integrity was one of them, And so it's not just having values, but really making sure they're true to who you are, who the organization is. But knowing that, because that's what you do. You hire, you fire, you review, you reward around values. So if you don't know your values, you don't know what true north is, it's hard to make sure you're bringing in the right culture fit. So that's the first thing. And I've been fortunate to be a part of two great organizations that were very values driven. And we all, it was said that the culture is who you let come through the door and who you bring into the organization. So you need to kind of have that defined for yourself. Otherwise, who knows what you'll end up with. And then just personally, this is more personally when I'm recruiting and maybe interviewing, I like working with people that are authentic, honest, real people. And it was just recently, I came across a book by Patrick Lencioni. There's really good books, but there's a book he wrote by, I think it's called The Ideal Team Player. And he boils down the ideal team player to have three traits. They're humble, hungry, and smart. And humble is they're willing to set their ego aside, choose not to be offended, and really work towards the greater good of the business. That's how it would define humble. Hungry, there's just a drive and a hunger to become great in the role that they're doing. And smart, this is my definition. I don't remember how Patrick Lencioni, but it's emotional intelligence. It's having people skills and being able to communicate and handle situations well. That's smart. Not necessarily, he wasn't talking about intelligence. He was talking about emotional intelligence. So, those are the three traits I'm actually find myself looking for: humble, hungry, and smart.
I think that they're awesome. And I love that they're boiled down to even being that simple, quote unquote, because, the idea of just humility in general, that would solve so many problems in so many organizations if we simply had humble and authentic people, because oftentimes those are people that you not only can you work with because their pride and their ego is not big enough to destroy a team, but they're also typically really likable, those people as well. And then the other point, just as far as, intelligence, I think a lot of times, at least what I've seen talking to thousands and thousands of people is, communication skills are of the utmost importance. And oftentimes, I think that that can be overlooked because of an experience or a GPA or something like that. But that emotional intelligence or that EQ, I think is so crucial. Got to have people who can communicate to clients, to colleagues, etc. So that's good advice. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So as we wrap up here, I always like to ask people, looking kind of back at your career and what's kind of helped shape you, what maybe books would you recommend to our audience that's really maybe shaped your journey or been most impactful for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I've read a lot of books. I like books. Two come to mind. The first one it's called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. And it changed my perspective of, that imposter syndrome I mentioned earlier, like just that relationship with self-confidence and all those things. It really puts things in perspective. And it was a game changer to read that book. That's Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. And the second book was called The Path of Least Resistance by Robert Fritz. And the theme of that book was really interesting because he takes the idea of creativity and how that is a work of art and how problem solving, that problem-solving orientation and mindset actually is at odds with creating. And he talks a lot about how we need to let go of that problem-solving mindset and move more into a creative mindset, because it's a paradigm change. And when you can make that fundamental shift, you become way more creative in your leadership and what you're doing, especially those that are building a business and creating something. There's a lot in that book. It's hard for me to summarize it. And as I'm trying to, that was a good one. Path of Least Resistance.
Okay. I'll put both of those in the show notes for everybody so they can take a look at it.
Cool.
And then I guess my other question I always like to ask at the end too, like what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self? Like, a bunch of former leaders or future leaders and current leaders listening to this, you look back and maybe people who want to be in a position that you're in, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
At 20, I honestly don't know what I'd tell my 20-year-old self. Like, just keep going. Yeah. There's more, but I want to change your question to, like, it was my early 30s that I would love to go back. I say that, but I'm like, everything happens for a reason. That's part of probably why I'm passionate about what I am today. But when I was 30 and a new executive, I would want to tell myself, in a way, stop trying to prove yourself. Stop it. I would want to say, I don't remember who said the quote, but great leaders, they don't try to prove themselves. They're always trying to express themselves. And now we're back to the values. They see what they do as kind of a work of art. They're creating. They're bringing something into life. And back in my 30s, I was trying to do more to be more, and it was exhausting. And honestly, in many ways, I'll throw out the word failed. I didn't do my position justice because I had that mentality. Because I was just focused on doing as much as I could. I was saying yes to everything, responding to emails within 5 minutes, literally 24/7. Like, just, I was always on, but I wasn't ever really working on the business. I was working in the business. In fact, I was a victim of I was at the effect of everything, firefighting, instead of thinking like a leader and making sure I have the right people in the right seats and making sure I'm looking 6 to 12 months out, right? But because I was trying to do more to be more, improve myself, I just couldn't allow myself to slow down enough to think and reflect and contemplate. And so that's the advice I'd give myself in my 30s. Fair to change your question. Yeah.
30s is good enough. Yeah. I feel like I need advice for my 30s, so that's helpful.
Yeah, I think we all do. 30s is we're getting married, around kids at 30s, a lot of life changes come in the 30s.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, man, I really enjoyed the conversation. There's been a lot of good things here. For people who might want to learn more about what you're doing with Create Purpose coaching and, might be interested in coaching or just being able to get in touch with you, where should they go to learn more? Yeah,
I'm on LinkedIn, so if you search for my name, you'll find me that way. But probably my website, which is www.createpurpose.net. I try to write and do some free trainings, and so that'd be a good way to plug in. And I'd love to get to know whoever would be interested. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. It was Zach Arend joining us today, and we appreciate you guys. Bye.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks for listening to the Recruiting Stories podcast. If you haven't yet, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on LinkedIn, Adrian Chapman, and Cover 3 Consulting is our company page. Also check out our website, www.cov3consulting.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and we just simply want to remind you that you can change the world by putting people in a position where they can do the most good, and you do that by recruiting. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.